Alright, now that I have all my fiber optic done, or 90% of it done, I can start lighting the fiber and figuring out where I'm going to put all my bulbs inside the model, so when I finally start putting this thing together, it'll be a little bit easier. So what I'm doing for the lighting is, this is a homemade design for a light tube. Basically, I use 5mm LEDs most of the time, and I use a tube for that, but I would have needed 50 or 60 bulbs to light all this fiber, so I needed an easier way. This thing is custom made to fit this bulb. This is a light SMD, it's actually made for RVs. It's warm white, and all these little SMDs light up. It is really bright, so I need something that's going to blast light down this tube, so any fiber that I throw in here is going to light up. I don't want to have to use too many bulbs in this model, and I think I can get away with using, like, for example, like 4 bulbs in the entire building section. Most of that is all going to be lit by 4 of these bulbs. So the odds of all those bulbs going out, the less bulbs you have, the less of a chance any of the bulbs are going to go out, right? So if I have 50 or 60 5mm LEDs, I can tell you right now, 1 or 2 of those is going to fail. These are new to me. I don't know. They have a very, very long life. Even at 10 volts, they're extremely bright. So I can't even look at them. I was testing them, and I turned one up to 10 volts, and I was seeing spots for like 10 minutes. So what I'm doing is, there's a wire on the bottom for each positive and negative, and they're not labeled, so you just have to figure out which one is which. And I'm kind of bending them so they stick out, so I can put wires on them. I know that this is positive because I just did like 3 or 4 of them, and they're all the same. So I'm going to make this very sturdy, so you won't be able to pull the wire off. If I'm screwing around inside the model and I accidentally pull on a wire, and it won't disconnect from the actual LED. I'm using wrapping wire for this. I use this for almost every model. It's cheap. You can use, it's a really good wire, and it's plenty gauge enough to carry 12 volts. So I'm very liberal with this stuff. I'm going to make a section here that's probably about 2 feet long, and I can just trim it up later. So I'm cutting about 1 inch of insulation off, and I'm taking this and I'm going to wrap the wire around here and around here, and then I'm going to bend this back. And the great thing about these bulbs is the positive and the negative are on opposite sides of this piece of plastic, so there's no way they're going to touch, and then I could just wrap this whole thing in electrical tape, and then I could attach it to my tube after I test it, of course, and then any fiber optic that I stuff in there will get lit. That's the theory. So let me solder this up, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's lit. So this is all I'm going to do. I'm just going to wrap this around so it's nice and tight, and then I'm going to solder it. I'm going to wrap it in electrical tape. I'm going to test it, and that's it. I'm hoping that I'll have enough of these bulbs. I have to buy more. I think I bought 25 to test them out, and they really passed with flying colors for this project. So I bought a whole assortment of different strong, really bright LEDs. So I bent the wire. Each wire is wrapped around several times, and now I'm just going to solder that, and I'll have my working light. Okay, so here's my completed and soldered little light. I have electrical tape around the end. Everything's nice and secure. And here's my little tube, and I'm going to put this thing in here. I'm going to glue these on once they're tested. They're not going to come off this, they're nice and snug in this. I don't want to blind everybody, so I'm going to actually turn this on so you can see there's a lot of light coming out of there. Anywhere fiber goes in this tube, it's going to light up. I can test it. Just happen to have this part right here. Here we go. All that stuff's lit up. I'm getting nice bright light out of there, so everything looks good to me. Experiment is a success for now. Okay, so after some work on arranging my fiber optic, getting my lights installed into the little tube things, I'll show you what I ended up with. That's it. Everything is all really organized, it's all neat, all the fiber is actually sitting in these tubes. There's no way it's going to come out. So I used 2 bulbs in this whole section, and all the fiber is bunched with zip ties. So I kind of sectioned off the fiber into, you know, whatever sections are together here. Like you can see here, this whole section is zip tied. And then I grouped it and kind of put it into the tube, and the tube is attached to the model with CA glue. I was really careful when I put it on. I didn't want to get the CA anywhere near this fiber, so I only needed 2. I got one facing this way, one facing that way for the front and the back. I'll show you what it looks like. Now keep in mind, this fiber is painted. I put the fiber in and then painted the part, so it has paint on it. So as you can see, everything's lit up. I'm not sure if it's the paint yet, but I think it probably is due to the paint. But some of these are getting varying brightness, which I really like. Some of the lights are brighter than other ones. If it's too even, it looks too fake. So I kind of like the way it looks right now. And everything seems like it's all lit up. I do have a bunch of them because I was tossing this thing around for so long. Some of the fiber did break along the way. I wasn't too careful with it. I should have been more careful after I put the fiber in. So some of the fiber broke. I have to fix that. And now this is going to show me where all my light leaks are, so I can fix all those. All the cracks I need to fill in and putty and everything else. So it looks pretty good. This is going to save a lot of hassle, I can tell you right now, because I've done these before, and I start going on these with the fiber, and you know, the next thing you know, you have a bird's nest on your hand of fiber, and you have bulbs laying on top of one another. If you have an issue where you have too many bulbs in here, the odds of something touching are pretty high, and then your whole model is going to go dark. So, and it's not going to be easy to troubleshoot. So this should help me out. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to test this for about a day or two. I'm going to leave it on. I'm going to test the heat to make sure it's not getting too hot, because I had some concerns about, now even though LEDs give off very little heat, I'm not feeling any heat at all in there. So I'm going to let this sit on for a couple of days, and I'll keep testing it periodically to see if there's any heat coming out. I was worried that there might be too much heat, and after you put the whole model together, it might just melt, but it cause a fire even worse. But I'll test it out, see how it goes. Well, I got 2 pieces of this together. The buildings are totally secured now, and I'm working on getting the bridge area cleared up so I can put the bridge on. And let me show you what I did in the underside of this. Hopefully that's not too bright. Let me kill the lights. So when you fit these 2 pieces on the hull, I basically just sat them on on the hull as they're going to sit on the top of the hull, and I tack them in place with super glue in this joint here, just in a couple spots, so I can hold these two pieces together, and then I clamp them so they weren't going to move. And then once I had them temporarily stuck together, I made some brackets under here, one here that's laying against this top building, and another one that goes across this main seam, and then I epoxied those in there, and I put a piece of tape along here, nice and tight, and then I generously put epoxy in here. And what the epoxy basically did was fill in this seam, or probably like 70% of it, and it held these brackets in place. So I was pretty liberal with the epoxy in there. It didn't matter if it got on the fiber. It's not going to hurt the fiber. So once that was cured, I took the tape off, and there's still a little bit of a seam here, but a lot of this is filled in with epoxy. Now that's fine. Once it's fully cured, I can chip away at it and sand it. That way I don't have to fill in this entire seam with putty. It's already filled in with epoxy, and the epoxy is actually going to hold these pieces together a lot better than putty would. So this area, you can see I cut a hole for the wiring and the fiber to go out of the bridge and into the main part of the ship, and I put some styrene here to hold these two pieces together. So all of that's tight, and that's looking good. And here's my bridge, and I haven't secured any of this fiber yet or put the face plate on, and that's going to sit in here like this. And then I have to put a piece on the back here. So as far as that goes, everything is really lining up nicely. There's a couple of millimeters I have to make up to push this bridge forward a little bit so it lines up with this back piece, but it's really close right now, and I'll be able to attach that. And once that's attached, I can finish off all my seam work. I can finish off all my fiber in the bridge section and this front section, and then I'll work on this building in the front here. So that's what I'm doing with the main building section. Alright, so while the top is drying, I did some painting on the top, and I'm still working on the top pieces. I decided to work on the bottom as well because I finished my engine section, and I put all my little pipes in there. I got my bulbs in, everything's tested. I got my wires coming out that go through this end piece, and here is my support which I have not installed yet. So then my plan is to clamp this in place so everything lines up first. Make sure it's all pushed and clamped down where I want it, and then I'm going to run epoxy all along the back of this so it holds this entire bottom section in place, and then I'm going to fit this in place against the engine piece. Once that's all tacked down and in place, then I can work on putting my side pieces on. I'm not doing that until I get this piece completely installed, because I have to kind of snake the fiber through all these parts and these holes and everything else. So I have to wait to put the side parts on until I actually figure out how this is all going to line up. And it's looking pretty good so far, so I'm not seeing any major issues. So I'm going to tack this in place and then hope for the best. Well, I'm putting the inside support in, and I'm fitting it the best way that I possibly can so it's straight. So he does mention this in the instructions. You may have to shim this back piece so it's aligned right, because the model's so big, it may get misaligned a little bit. So that interior support may not be perfectly centered until you align it. So as you can see, I have the sides clamped. So what I did This is kind of hard to explain, but I'll do the best I can. So I wanted to make sure that this whole section here was straight, which I took great pains to do with the jigs and everything else. So I knew that this interior support wasn't perfect. So if I clamp these down, all of these to the bottom hole, it would throw this whole thing out. So what I did was on the bottom, I put a metal rod in here. So the metal rod is telling me, you know, what a straight line is going to look like from bow to stern, and I'm following that to make sure that the hull is aligned. And what I'm doing is I'm shimming these pieces so this whole section doesn't get bent out of whack. So when I fill in the shim here, I can press down and glue it in place. And I have a bunch of shims in there. You can see there, that's styrene. That's actually wood, because this piece was bowed a little bit. So now that's pulled, and the shims are already in place on the other side. So what I'm doing now is I'm getting ready to tack down this side. So the whole support is actually permanently installed. I mean, it already is permanently installed because there's a lot of epoxy in there. By the way, buy a lot of epoxy if you're going to work on this thing, because you're going to need it if you use epoxy. I'm not really sure what everybody uses, but that's what I use for these big ones. So I think that's going to do it for this part. I'm going to finish installing this interior section. Then I'm going to put my side pieces on, and I'm going to probably permanently install those. And as you can see, my wiring is all through the back and all neatly tied up. And the top buildings are giving me a little bit of a hard time, so I'm going to be wrestling with those for a little while so I can get those installed. See you for the next part.
Heavy base of action!